The first time Daniel noticed the missing hour, he thought it was exhaustion. He worked as a digital archivist in a quiet historical preservation center located between two older university buildings that had survived 3 renovations, 2 funding crises, and 1 fire. His job was simple in theory: digitize old handwritten records, letters, journals, and forgotten manuscripts so they could be preserved for future generations. He scanned, cataloged, labeled, and stored documents that most people would never read again. Daniel liked it that way. There was something comforting about preserving voices from the past. The documents never demanded answers. They never interrupted him. They simply existed, waiting patiently to be acknowledged. His office was narrow and windowless, illuminated by a soft yellow desk lamp and the pale glow of 2 large monitors. Shelves lined the walls, filled with labeled archive boxes. The air smelled faintly of old paper and machine dust. It was a quiet life, predictable, safe, and Daniel valued safety more than anything else. The missing hour happened on a Thursday afternoon. He remembered sitting at his desk, scanning a collection of personal letters written during the early 1950s. The handwriting was delicate and uneven, belonging to a young woman writing to her brother who had moved overseas. Daniel had been adjusting the scanner resolution when he glanced at the clock on the corner of his monitor. 2:14 p.m. He blinked once, turned to adjust a folder beside him, and when he looked back, the clock read 3:21 p.m. At first, he thought the computer had glitched. He checked his phone. Same time. Daniel frowned but shrugged it off. He had been working long hours that week. Losing track of time wasn't unusual, especially when focusing on repetitive tasks. He returned to work and finished scanning the letters. Still, something felt slightly displaced, like waking from a dream and not remembering it, only feeling its absence. He ignored the feeling. Over the next week, it happened again and again. Sometimes it was only 20 minutes. Other times, nearly 2 hours disappeared without warning. Daniel would remain seated in the same position, the same document open on his screen, the same scanning process paused mid-task. There were no signs he had left his chair, no drafts written, no emails sent, no browser history. Nothing suggested he had been distracted or working elsewhere. Just absence. Daniel began documenting the occurrences in a small black notebook he normally used for cataloging unusual document conditions. March 8th, lost 47 minutes. No memory. March 11th, lost 1 hour, 12 minutes. Scanner paused mid-page. March 14th, lost 23 minutes. Mild headache afterward. He told himself it was stress, burnout, possibly sleep deprivation. He started going to bed earlier and drinking less coffee. He even downloaded a mindfulness app recommended by a colleague, though he never used it consistently. Despite his efforts, the missing time continued. But something else began to change too. Daniel started finding small notes in his workspace written in handwriting that looked almost like his own, but slightly different, sharper, more decisive. The first note appeared beneath his keyboard. Checkbox C, 19 before digitizing. He stared at it for a long time. The handwriting resembled his quick annotation style, but Daniel was meticulous. He never left loose instructions without logging them digitally. He opened box C, 19, and discovered several documents had been misfiled decades earlier. They belonged to a completely different collection. The correction saved hours of potential archival confusion. Daniel felt a strange chill of gratitude toward the unknown note writer. He convinced himself he must have written it during one of his missing hours. That explanation felt logical, comfortable, until the notes continued appearing. This record is mislabeled. Cross-reference this name in the city migration archives. You skip page 4. Every message was accurate, helpful, precise. Daniel never remembered writing them. At first, he considered installing a small desk camera. The idea unsettled him, but his curiosity grew stronger than his discomfort. He ordered a discreet recording device and positioned it between two archive boxes aimed directly at his workspace. He activated it on a Monday morning. The first 3 days revealed nothing unusual. Daniel worked normally, occasionally stretching, occasionally rubbing his eyes, occasionally checking the clock. On Thursday, the missing hour returned. Daniel didn't realize it until 5:02 p.m., when he noticed the timestamp jump forward again. His stomach tightened as he immediately reached for the camera. He replayed the footage. For several minutes, everything looked normal. He scanned documents, adjusted folders, typed notes into the archive database. Then, at exactly 3:17 p.m., Daniel froze. Not collapsed, not unconscious, frozen. His posture straightened slightly. His breathing slowed. His expression lost its familiar mild concentration and became distant, calculating. He calmly reached for his notebook and began writing. The handwriting was different, more structured, more deliberate. He worked with unsettling efficiency, reorganizing 3 archive folders, correcting digital labels, and scanning additional documents Daniel hadn't even noticed were incomplete. The movements were controlled, almost mechanical, yet not robotic, intentional. At 4:11 p.m., he paused, closed the notebook, and returned to scanning the original document. At 4:12 p.m., Daniel blinked and resumed work normally, unaware of anything that had just happened. Daniel stared at the footage until midnight that night. He watched the moment repeatedly, trying to recognize himself inside that version of him. The body was his. The hands were his. But the presence inside the movements felt unfamiliar. Not hostile, just not entirely him. Sleep became difficult after that discovery. Daniel's mind replayed the footage constantly. He noticed details he had missed before. The alternate version of himself never wasted motion, never hesitated, never paused to reread instructions or double-check steps. It was as if someone had removed his uncertainty and replaced it with pure function. 3 nights later, Daniel found another note on his desk. You should rest more. You're inefficient when exhausted. Daniel dropped the paper as if it had burned him. That sentence felt personal, observational, almost protective. His heart pounded as he slowly sat down. The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, heavier with invisible presence. He whispered aloud, unsure why. Who are you? Of course, no one answered. But that night, Daniel made a decision he had never imagined making in his structured, carefully controlled life. He wrote a note of his own and placed it directly in the center of his desk. If you are writing these, please explain. He stared at the message for several minutes before leaving the office. The following morning, his hands trembled slightly as he unlocked his workspace door. The note was gone. In its place sat a new page, folded neatly. Daniel hesitated before opening it. His pulse echoed loudly in his ears as he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was the same unfamiliar version of his own. It contained only one sentence. I exist when you stop trying to control everything. Daniel sat down slowly, reading the line again and again. His entire life had been built around control, organized routines, predictable schedules, carefully managed emotions, measured conversations, calculated decisions. Control had always made him feel safe. But now, safety itself seemed to be creating someone else. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the shelves of preserved memories surrounding him. Thousands of forgotten voices cataloged and stored in perfect order. For the first time, Daniel wondered if he had been archiving himself the same way, preserving, categorizing, and silencing parts of who he might have been. And now, something inside him was quietly refusing to remain archived. As he sat there, holding the note with trembling fingers, Daniel realized something deeply unsettling and strangely liberating at the same time. He wasn't losing time. He was sharing it. Daniel didn't respond to the note immediately. He spent most of that morning pretending to work while his thoughts circled the single sentence written in the unfamiliar version of his handwriting. I exist when you stop trying to control everything. The words echoed inside him with uncomfortable clarity. Daniel had always believed control was the foundation of stability. His childhood had taught him that unpredictability led to chaos, and chaos led to loss. His father had been unpredictable. His mother had been anxious. Their house had been filled with silent tension, broken only by arguments that arrived without warning and ended without resolution. Daniel had survived those years by becoming quiet, organized, and invisible to conflict. Control had not just been a habit. It had been protection. And now something inside him suggested that protection might be the very thing dividing his identity. By mid-afternoon, Daniel finally decided to write another message. He opened his black notebook and carefully printed each word. "Are you dangerous?" He stared at the question for several seconds, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. He placed the notebook in the center of his desk, directly beneath the camera lens, and waited. Nothing happened for hours. By 6:40 p.m., Daniel sighed, closed his computer, and packed his bag. He hesitated before leaving, glancing once more at the silent notebook. Part of him felt relieved. Another part felt strangely disappointed. The answer appeared the next morning. Daniel's heart immediately began racing when he saw the notebook slightly repositioned. He opened it carefully, as if expecting it to vanish. Below his question was a reply written in the same sharp, controlled script. "No, I prevent danger." Daniel swallowed hard. Prevent danger. He flipped the page, searching for more explanation, but the message ended there. The simplicity made it more unsettling than any detailed response could have been. He sat down slowly, pressing his palms against the desk as if grounding himself in the physical world around him. His eyes drifted toward the shelves of archival records. For years, he had trusted documentation to preserve truth. Now documentation was revealing something he couldn't categorize. The missing hours increased, not dramatically, but noticeably. Sometimes Daniel lost time twice in a single day. Each time he reviewed the recordings, the alternate version of himself, the presence he had begun privately calling the Supervisor, appeared calm, focused, and methodical. The Supervisor reorganized entire catalog systems, corrected digital errors Daniel hadn't detected, and even responded to several professional emails using language that was precise and unexpectedly confident. One recorded email draft stunned Daniel the most. A senior researcher had requested access to restricted archive materials, something Daniel would normally escalate to administration. Instead, during one missing hour, the Supervisor had written, "Your request has been approved under conditional review. I will personally oversee the document integrity to ensure preservation compliance." Daniel had never described himself as personally overseeing anything. The phrase carried authority he rarely felt. The researcher had replied with immediate gratitude and professional respect. Daniel reread that email at least 10 times, unsure whether he felt proud or displaced. The first direct internal experience happened 2 weeks after he found the original message. Daniel was scanning a collection of immigration records when he felt the now familiar pressure behind his eyes, a subtle shift, like his thoughts were slowly being pushed aside rather than disappearing completely. Instead of losing consciousness, Daniel remained partially aware. He felt his posture straighten without deciding to move. His breathing slowed. His hands reached for the notebook. Inside his mind, he felt company, not a voice exactly, more like structured thoughts forming beside his own. "You are tired." Daniel's fingers froze above the notebook. His pulse accelerated. "Are you here right now?" he whispered under his breath. "Yes." The answer appeared inside his awareness like text projected onto his thoughts. Daniel's chest tightened. He expected panic, but what he felt instead was cautious curiosity mixed with deep, instinctive fear. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. You created me. The statement hit him harder than he expected. I didn't create you, Daniel whispered. You created the need for me. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The office felt too silent, too still, as if even the air was waiting for his reaction. I don't understand, he admitted. You suppressed uncertainty. You suppressed risk. You suppressed emotional response. The mind compensates when imbalance becomes unsustainable. The explanation felt disturbingly logical. Daniel opened his eyes, staring at his own hands resting calmly on the notebook, calmer than he felt internally. Are you better than me? He asked before he could stop himself. There was a pause. I am efficient. You are adaptive. Both are necessary. Daniel exhaled slowly, surprised by the unexpected neutrality of the answer. Over the next several days, Daniel experimented cautiously with communication. Sometimes he left written questions. Sometimes he spoke aloud during moments when he felt the internal shift approaching. The supervisor always responded briefly, precisely, never emotionally. Daniel began noticing patterns. The supervisor appeared most strongly when Daniel felt overwhelmed, uncertain, or emotionally conflicted. During routine tasks, Daniel remained fully present. It was as if the supervisor existed specifically to stabilize him during psychological vulnerability. One evening, Daniel reviewed older recordings and noticed something he had missed before. During one missing hour, he had received a phone call from his younger sister, Emily. They spoke for 9 minutes. Daniel had no memory of the conversation. He pressed play. Emily's voice sounded anxious, explaining that she was considering leaving her job and moving to another city. Daniel listened as the supervisor responded calmly, offering structured advice about financial planning, housing research, and employment transition strategies. The tone was supportive but emotionally distant. When the call ended, Emily said softly, "You sound different lately, more confident, but also farther away." Daniel paused the video. Her words echoed painfully inside him. That night, Daniel wrote another question in the notebook. Are you replacing me? He stared at the page for several minutes before closing the notebook and leaving it on his desk. The answer appeared the following morning. No, I am protecting the system you built. But protection can become restriction. Daniel reread the sentence repeatedly, feeling a slow realization forming inside him. For years, he had limited emotional expression, avoided conflict, rejected spontaneity, and structured every decision around minimizing risk. He had believed he was maintaining stability, but perhaps he had also been narrowing his experience of being alive. And now his mind had responded by creating a version of himself that functioned perfectly within those restrictions, efficient, confident, decisive, but emotionally distant. The internal conversations became more frequent. Sometimes Daniel and the supervisor coexisted during short intervals, sharing awareness like overlapping thoughts rather than separate personalities. Daniel described it privately as dual focus. During one of these moments, Daniel asked something that had been building inside him for days. Do you feel anything? The answer came slower than usual. I experience priority, urgency, and resolution. That's not the same as emotion, Daniel said quietly. No. Daniel hesitated before asking his next question. Do you want to exist? There was a longer pause this time. Daniel felt a strange tension inside his chest, as if waiting for an answer that might redefine everything. I exist because you required survival. Daniel closed his eyes again, absorbing the weight of that statement. Late that evening, after the office had emptied and the building lights dimmed into nighttime security mode, Daniel sat alone at his desk reviewing months of archived footage and documentation. The evidence was undeniable. The supervisor had improved his professional performance, increased accuracy, prevented multiple cataloging errors, and maintained external relationships with unexpected confidence. But Daniel also noticed something else. During the weeks the supervisor became more active, Daniel's personal journal entries had become shorter. His social interactions had decreased. He had declined 2 invitations from friends without clear explanation. Efficiency had increased, but presence had quietly faded. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling tiles illuminated by the soft glow of his desk lamp. "Are you still here?" he asked softly. "Yes." Daniel inhaled slowly, feeling the shared awareness settle between his thoughts again. I might need to learn how to live without controlling everything," he said. The internal response came almost immediately. "That will increase unpredictability." "I know," Daniel whispered. There was a brief silence inside his mind. Not empty, but contemplative. Then the supervisor responded with a statement that made Daniel's heart skip slightly. "Unpredictability increases risk, but also expands possibility." Daniel smiled faintly, surprised by the unexpected openness in the answer. He looked down at his hands resting on the notebook and spoke one final sentence before leaving the office for the night. "Maybe we both need to learn something new." For the first time since discovering the missing hours, Daniel didn't feel fear as he turned off the desk lamp and stepped into the darkened hallway. He felt something far more unfamiliar. He felt transition. Daniel stopped tracking the missing hours. Not completely at first. The habit of reviewing security footage remained, but the urgency behind it slowly dissolved. Instead of searching for proof that he was losing control, he began watching the recordings with a different question forming quietly inside him. What is trying to emerge? The change unsettled him. For most of his life, Daniel had measured safety through predictability. He believed awareness meant control, and control meant survival. Now he was beginning to suspect that awareness might require something entirely different. Acceptance. The turning point arrived during a rainstorm that seemed to stretch across the entire city for 3 continuous days. The archive building felt unusually isolated. Rain struck the tall windows in slow, rhythmic waves, turning the outside world into a blurred gray landscape. Inside, the air carried a calm stillness Daniel found both peaceful and unsettling. By mid-afternoon on the second day, Daniel felt the familiar internal shift begin. The subtle pressure behind his eyes, the sensation of shared awareness forming inside his mind. But this time, he didn't resist it. Instead, he spoke quietly. "I want to stay present," he said. The response appeared gently inside his thoughts. "You may remain present." Daniel inhaled sharply. The answer felt like an invitation rather than a correction. "What happens if we both stay?" he asked. There was a brief pause before the reply formed. "Integration is possible, but it requires permission." Daniel rested his elbows on the desk, pressing his fingers together as he considered the word. Permission. For years, he had granted permission only to structure, order, and emotional restraint. Everything unpredictable had been filtered, suppressed, or avoided. The supervisor had grown from that imbalance, a precise adaptation to a life built entirely around safety. Now the question felt heavier than any he had asked before. Permission to do what? Daniel whispered. To exist without hierarchy. The phrase lingered inside him like a riddle. That evening, Daniel remained in the archive long after the building closed. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling across the city skyline like distant echoes of shifting ground. He sat alone in the main records hall, surrounded by thousands of preserved lives documented in paper and ink. Birth certificates, marriage records, immigration documents, death registries. Every file represented a life that had unfolded beyond control, shaped by events no system could fully organize. Daniel ran his fingers slowly along the spine of a thick archival ledger, feeling the textured surface beneath his touch. People lived entire lives without knowing what would happen next, he said quietly. Yes, the agreement inside his mind felt steady, neutral, and they still lived fully, Daniel added, often because they did not attempt to control everything. Daniel exhaled slowly. The statement felt both obvious and revolutionary. Over the next several hours, Daniel experienced something he later described as internal conversation without separation. The supervisor's presence no longer felt like a separate authority. Instead, it felt like a structured perspective existing alongside his emotional awareness. Daniel asked questions he had been afraid to ask. Why did you become so strong, he asked. You trained yourself to eliminate uncertainty. The mind compensated by creating stability through control. Did I create you to survive my childhood? Daniel continued. Yes. The answer carried no accusation, only clarity. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the dim ceiling lights flickering slightly as thunder vibrated through the building's structure. I think I'm tired of surviving, he admitted softly. The internal silence that followed felt deeper than any response. Then the supervisor replied, Then you must learn to live. The integration did not happen dramatically. There was no sudden merging or disappearance. Instead, it unfolded gradually, like two overlapping maps slowly aligning into a single landscape. Daniel noticed the first change during a phone call with his sister a week later. Emily sounded stressed again, explaining that she had decided to accept the job offer in another city, but felt terrified about leaving everything familiar behind. Daniel listened carefully, feeling both emotional empathy and structured clarity forming inside his thoughts. In the past, he would have either offered purely logical advice or withdrawn emotionally to avoid saying the wrong thing. This time, he spoke differently. You're allowed to be afraid and excited at the same time, he said gently. Both can exist without canceling each other. Emily was quiet for several seconds. That's actually really helpful, she said finally. You sound different, but in a good way. Daniel smiled faintly. I think I'm learning how to listen differently, he replied. The missing hours stopped completely 3 weeks later. Daniel didn't notice immediately. The realization came gradually as days passed without gaps in memory. He continued working, writing, organizing, and communicating with the same efficiency the supervisor had demonstrated, but now he experienced every moment consciously. One afternoon, Daniel opened the black notebook where their written conversations had begun. He flipped through the pages, reading each question and response carefully, as if reviewing a record of psychological evolution. At the very end of the notebook, he found a final message written in the familiar sharp script. Stability achieved through balance, not control. Daniel stared at the sentence for a long time, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. He picked up his pen and wrote beneath it, Are you still here? For the first time, there was no separate handwriting in response. But Daniel didn't feel alone. Instead, he felt a quiet internal alignment, like two voices that had once spoken separately were now part of single, steady awareness. Months passed. Daniel's life changed in subtle but undeniable ways. He accepted invitations he would have previously declined. He allowed conversations to unfold without rehearsing responses. He made small decisions without exhaustive analysis. Uncertainty still existed. Anxiety still appeared occasionally, but it no longer dominated his internal landscape. Daniel began keeping a new journal, not to document control strategies, but to record moments of emotional presence. He wrote about rainstorms, unexpected laughter with coworkers, and quiet evenings where he allowed thoughts to drift without forcing resolution. He described these entries as living documentation rather than structure analysis. One evening, Daniel returned to the archive building after hours to retrieve a personal notebook he had forgotten. The security lights cast long, quiet shadows across the empty records hall, creating the same atmosphere where his transformation had begun months earlier. He paused beside the shelves of preserved lives and spoke softly into the silence. I thought control was strength, he said. Inside his mind, the integrated awareness responded, not as a separate voice, but as clarity forming naturally within his thoughts. Strength is the ability to remain present when control disappears. Daniel nodded slightly, feeling the truth settle inside him with surprising calm. He walked slowly toward the exit, turning off the final row of lights behind him. The building faded into darkness, but Daniel felt no fear walking through the silent hallway. He stepped outside and paused beneath the open night sky. Clouds drifted slowly across the moon, shifting shape without structure, without direction, yet still part of a vast, balanced system beyond human design. Daniel inhaled deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. For the first time in his life, He allowed himself to stand in uncertainty without searching for immediate explanation. And instead of feeling lost, he felt free.